The courtroom was a cauldron of tension, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters clustered at the back, their cameras poised, capturing every flicker of emotion on the faces of those present. The gallery was packed, a sea of eager onlookers, each person aware that they were witnessing a moment that could alter the course of political history. At the center of this storm stood Representative Jasmine Crockett, her expression a mask of determination. She had been preparing for this day for months, her team working tirelessly to compile evidence, strategize, and anticipate every move her opponents might make. Today was the culmination of that effort. As the judge called the court to order, the murmurs subsided, and all eyes turned to the front. Crockett rose from her seat, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. She approached the podium with a sense of purpose, her every step measured, deliberate. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone present. She began by outlining the gravitas of the lawsuit she was about to present. This was no ordinary legal challenge. It was a direct confrontation with one of the most powerful figures in the nation. The stakes were monumental, and the implications far-reaching. She spoke of accountability, of the need to uphold the integrity of the legal system, and of the responsibility that came with holding those in power to the highest standards. Then, with a calm but firm voice, she introduced the core of her case, a $5 billion lawsuit accusing former President Donald Trump of orchestrating a complex scheme to manipulate legal outcomes and evade accountability. The room seemed to hold its breath as she detailed the allegations, each one more damning than the last. Her legal team stood by, ready to present a meticulously crafted array of documents, internal communications, financial records, and other evidence that painted a picture of deliberate and systemic fraudulent activities. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a larger pattern of behavior designed to deceive, mislead, and ultimately escape the consequences of the law. As the evidence was presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Gasps of disbelief rippled through the gallery. Even the most seasoned legal professionals exchanged looks of astonishment. The documents were irrefutable, the connections clear. This was not a baseless accusation. It was a well-documented case that demanded attention. Outside the courthouse, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines blared with the shocking details. Social media erupted in a frenzy of commentary and speculation. Supporters of Crockett hailed her bravery, while detractors questioned her motives. But one thing was certain. The political landscape had been irrevocably altered. The opening gambit had been played. The challenge had been issued. And now, the battle for justice would unfold, with every move scrutinized, every argument dissected, and every revelation holding the potential to reshape the future. The courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Jasmine Crockett's team had delivered the opening salvo, presenting a labyrinth of financial records, internal emails, and witness accounts. Now, the real test began, defending the integrity of their case against one of the most aggressive legal teams in American politics. Trump's attorneys wasted no time. They filed motions to dismiss, asserting that Crockett's allegations were politically motivated and lacked sufficient evidence. Their language was precise, surgical, designed to intimidate and undermine. These claims are speculative, conjectural, and fail to meet the threshold of actionable wrongdoing. One attorney declared, his voice echoing off the high courtroom walls. They sought not just to dismiss the lawsuit, but to frame Crockett's team as opportunistic, overreaching, and desperate for political headlines. Jasmine watched from her table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her legal team moved like a well-oiled machine, anticipating every challenge, dissecting every argument, and preparing rebuttals that left no angle unexamined. She knew that in this arena, preparation was survival. Every document, every witness, Every precedent could become a weapon or a trap. The judge presiding over the motions listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He asked pointed questions about the scope of evidence, the legal merit of the claims, and the constitutional implications of proceeding. Jasmine's lead attorney stood, confident and composed. "Your Honor, this is not political theater," she said. "This is a meticulously documented pattern of deliberate misrepresentation. We have witnesses, records, and communications that establish intent. Dismissing this case would be a failure of justice." The tension in the room was palpable. Every objection, every counterpoint, every question from the bench was met with rapid responses and legal precision. Outside the courthouse, journalists crowded the steps, microphones poised, cameras rolling, their eyes hungry for even a glimpse of drama. Social media had already exploded with speculation, and every move inside was being dissected in real time. Hours stretched into days as motions were argued and re-argued. Jasmine's team methodically demonstrated that the lawsuit had both factual and legal merit. Internal communications were traced, financial discrepancies were highlighted, and the defense's attempts to dismiss or delegitimize the case began to falter. Finally, the judge issued a ruling that sent ripples through the political world. The majority of the defense's motions to dismiss were denied. The lawsuit would proceed. Jasmine allowed herself a small, measured exhale, knowing that real battle had just begun. Outside, the crowd of reporters erupted with breaking headlines. But inside, the quiet determination of a team prepared for war was unmistakable. The legal battlefield had been drawn, and the opening skirmish had gone to Crockett, but the war was far from over. The trial shifted from legal maneuvering to human testimony, and the atmosphere in the courtroom became electric with anticipation. Jasmine Crockett's team called their first witness, a former executive from the Trump Organization, whose experience promised to shed light on the intricate mechanisms behind the alleged misconduct. The gallery leaned forward as the witness took the stand, a mixture of apprehension and resolve in their eyes. Under oath, the executive spoke with measured precision, recounting directives to manipulate financial statements and obscure the true value of properties. "I was instructed to adjust numbers to meet internal expectations, even if it misrepresented the actual financial position," the witness said, voice steady despite the weight of scrutiny. Every word seemed to reverberate in the chamber, punctuating the gravity of the allegations. Trump's legal team seized on any perceived inconsistency. "Isn't it possible that these discrepancies were simple errors, not intentional deception?" One attorney pressed, leaning in as if proximity could bend truth. But the witness remained firm, supported by a trail of documents that corroborated their statements, emails, memos, and meeting notes that revealed patterns rather than isolated incidents. The prosecution methodically unfolded each layer of the narrative. Another witness, a former member of the legal team, described instructions to withhold documents from regulatory inquiries, a revelation that drew audible gasps from the courtroom. "We were told certain reports should never reach the auditors," they testified, hands trembling as the enormity of the truth weighed down every sentence. Crockett's presence in the courtroom was commanding yet controlled. She listened, absorbing every detail, occasionally exchanging a subtle nod with her team. She understood the stakes. Each witness added credibility, each document tightened the net, and each revelation chipped away at the defense's narrative. Defense tried to fracture the testimonies, probing for motives, highlighting lapses in memory, and suggesting personal vendettas. Yet the weight of corroborating evidence, the chain of emails, financial logs, and recorded conversations rendered their attacks increasingly ineffective. The courtroom's energy shifted, an almost tangible momentum building toward the undeniable. Pattern Crockett had predicted by the end of the day, the prosecution had set a formidable foundation. The jury, though silent, was visibly affected. The witnesses' accounts painted a vivid picture of a systematic effort to manipulate legal and financial outcomes. Outside, reporters described the testimony as explosive and game-changing, while social media buzzed with clips and commentary. The stage was set. The battle over truth, deception, and accountability had moved beyond documents and motions. It was now human, raw, and undeniable. Asterisk. The courtroom bristled with tension as the defense launched its counterattack. Trump's lead attorney rose, his presence commanding, his voice calm but edged with authority. He framed the trial as an overreach, a politically motivated spectacle, designed to tarnish a prominent public figure. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he intoned, "these allegations rest on selective memories, incomplete documents, and the interpretations of witnesses who may not have the full picture." Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the attorney. She had anticipated this. Every defense tactic, every attempt to discredit her witnesses, had been meticulously prepared for. Her team had anticipated lines of questioning, emotional appeals, and legal sleight of hand, and now it was time to respond with precision. The first cross-examination began. The defense pressed the former executive on minor inconsistencies, probing their recollections and suggesting bias or grievance. "Isn't it true," the attorney asked, "that you were overlooked for a promotion and may have personal reasons to exaggerate?" The executive met the question without hesitation. "No, my testimony reflects documented events. My personal circumstances do not alter the facts." Emails and memos were brought to the stand, each highlighted to challenge credibility, each framed as potentially misleading. But Crockett's team countered methodically, pointing out context, corroboration, and repeated patterns of communication that left little room for doubt. The evidence was not circumstantial. It was a thread, connecting actions over time. The courtroom's mood shifted as witnesses spoke with emotion, some visibly shaken by the pressure of recounting deliberate deception. The defense attempted to exploit these moments, questioning reliability, but the prosecution underscored consistency across multiple accounts. The narrative began to solidify. This was not a collection of isolated incidents, but a calculated pattern. The judge intervened at critical points, ensuring decorum and fairness, but even impartial eyes could sense the rising momentum. The defense's objections, though frequent, were increasingly undermined by the weight of documentation and testimony. Outside the courtroom, news outlets dissected every exchange. Social media clips circulated, highlighting both the attacks and the steadfast responses. Public debate intensified, with commentators debating witness credibility, attorney strategy, and the broader implications of the trial. By the day's end, it was clear the cross-examination had shifted the dynamic. The defense's attempts to discredit the prosecution were faltering. Crockett's meticulous preparation, combined with the witness's unwavering testimony, had turned the courtroom tide. The battle lines were now unmistakable, the stakes higher than ever, and the narrative moving inexorably toward a dramatic confrontation that would test truth, accountability, and the limits of political power. Asterisk, the courtroom doors opened to a storm of cameras, microphones, and reporters as the media frenzy surrounding the trial reached a fever pitch. Outside, journalists jostled for vantage points, each one eager to capture the next dramatic twist in what had become a spectacle of national attention. The courthouse steps were alive with a restless crowd, supporters of Jasmine Crockett, waving signs proclaiming justice for all, while Trump backers countered with chants defending their leader and decrying what they called a politically motivated attack. Inside, the trial proceedings were broadcast live, and every word spoken carried the weight of public scrutiny. News anchors dissected the testimonies with near-surgical precision, replaying key moments, pausing for analysis, and speculating on what each revelation might mean for the outcome. Social media exploded, trending hashtags multiplying by the hour. Clips of witnesses delivering damning testimony went viral within minutes, accompanied by commentary ranging from outraged support to fierce skepticism. Crockett's calm presence became a visual anchor in a sea of chaos. She occasionally leaned forward, pen in hand, absorbing every word, nodding subtly as her team made their points. Even her opponents could not deny the meticulous orchestration behind every move, the timing of evidence, the sequencing of witness testimonies, the way arguments were framed to resonate both legally and emotionally with the jury and the public. Commentators debated the broader implications endlessly. Legal experts argued that if Crockett prevailed, it could set a precedent for holding powerful figures accountable in ways previously unseen. Political analysts warned of a seismic ripple effect, noting how public opinion was already shaping up as a parallel battlefield. Meanwhile, satirical segments and viral clips transformed courtroom exchanges into cultural moments, amplifying engagement far beyond the legal sphere. The media frenzy intensified the stakes within the courtroom. Witnesses were acutely aware that every word, every hesitation might be scrutinized globally. Defense attorneys adjusted their tactics, knowing that public perception could sway even the most attentive jurors. Every objection, every evidentiary dispute, was performed under an invisible yet unrelenting spotlight. By the end of the day, the courtroom had transformed from a venue of legal procedure into a theater of national attention. The trial had transcended traditional boundaries, becoming both a test of legal rigor and a contest for public persuasion. The media had amplified the drama, but beneath the headlines, Jasmine Crockett's team quietly solidified their narrative, understanding that truth, precision, and persistence were the tools that would ultimately carry them through the storm. The courtroom had quieted into a focused intensity as legal experts and analysts turned their attention to the implications of what was unfolding. The stakes were no longer merely political, they were judicial, setting the stage for a potential precedent in holding powerful figures accountable. Every document presented, every testimony delivered, was a brick in a structure that could redefine the boundaries of legal responsibility for public leaders. Jasmine Crockett's team methodically laid out the patterns of behavior, connecting emails, memos, and witness accounts to show a consistent, deliberate effort to mislead and manipulate. This wasn't about isolated errors or innocent oversight. It was a coordinated strategy to evade accountability. Each piece of evidence was explained with meticulous care, its relevance to the overarching legal standard underscored, and its credibility defended against the defense's counterarguments. The defense attempted to frame the case as unprecedented and politically motivated, arguing that a ruling in favor of Crockett could open the door to frivolous lawsuits against public officials. "We are entering uncharted territory," one attorney argued, "holding elected figures accountable through civil litigation for decisions made in their official capacity threatens to politicize the judiciary itself." But Crockett's legal team countered with precision. They emphasized that their claims were grounded in concrete evidence, demonstrating actions taken in private capacities with tangible financial consequences. Their argument was simple yet powerful. Accountability is not optional, and no individual, regardless of status, is immune from the law. The judge listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that highlighted the nuances of precedent and the potential long-term effects of a ruling. The tension in the room was almost tactile, as if every person present understood the historical weight of what was being argued. Outside, media coverage amplified the gravity of the moment. Legal scholars appeared on live broadcasts, dissecting the trial and speculating on how it might influence future cases. Social media discussions swirled with debates about the implications for political leaders and public trust in institutions. By the close of the session, It was clear that the trial was no longer just about the immediate dispute between Crockett and Trump. It had evolved into a defining moment for American jurisprudence, a test of how far the law could reach, how accountability could be enforced, and how precedent could shape the landscape of political and financial ethics for generations to come. The courtroom had become the crucible in which the future of accountability would be forged. Asterisk. Inside the halls of Congress, the trial reverberated like a shockwave. Lawmakers from both parties were acutely aware that the unfolding courtroom drama had implications far beyond the confines of the courthouse. Committees held emergency briefings. Caucus meetings buzzed with speculation, and staffers scurried to prepare talking points for a public suddenly hungering for clarity in leadership. Democrats lauded Jasmine Crockett's actions as a courageous stand for accountability. In hushed tones behind closed doors, they debated the broader message. A victory here could signal that no one, not even a former president, was above the law. "This is about trust in our institutions," one senior member remarked. "It's about reinforcing that the rules apply equally to everyone." Republicans, however, were mobilizing a narrative of defense. Many described the lawsuit as politically motivated, a strategic attempt to undermine a prominent figure ahead of looming elections. Public statements from prominent party leaders framed Crockett's case as overreach, warning that legal overextensions like this could set dangerous precedents. Staffers worked tirelessly to prepare rebuttals, interviews, and social media campaigns aimed at shaping the narrative in their favor. Amid the partisan back and forth, whispers of private negotiations and strategy meetings circulated. Some members, recognizing the delicate balance between principle and politics, quietly advised caution. A few more moderate voices argued that the focus should remain on the legal process itself, not on weaponizing the courtroom for partisan advantage. Meanwhile, constituents were energized. Advocacy groups ramped up efforts to contact representatives, hold rallies, and flood social media with petitions and commentary. Letters, emails, and calls poured into congressional offices, reflecting a public increasingly invested in the trial's outcome and its implications for the future of governance. As debate intensified both on Capitol Hill and in the public sphere, the courtroom proceedings continued with relentless scrutiny. The political fallout was immediate and unmistakable. Every testimony, every ruling, and every document had reverberations in the halls of power. The lines were drawn, the stakes defined not just by legal victory, but by the broader contest over public trust, political influence, and the rule of law itself. By the end of the week, it was evident that the trial had become more than a legal confrontation. It had transformed into a high-stakes political theater, where every argument resonated far beyond the courtroom, and every outcome could reshape the balance of power in Washington. Jasmine Crockett had not only opened a legal battle, she had ignited a political earthquake. The public response to the trial was a tidal wave, sweeping through cities, towns, and social media feeds alike. Grassroots organizations mobilized with a sense of urgency, calling for transparency, accountability, and justice. Streets outside the courthouse became stages for impassioned demonstrations, hundreds waving banners reading, "No one is above the law," while counter-protesters voiced their skepticism of what they saw as a politically motivated attack. Community leaders and activists spoke passionately to crowds and cameras alike, emphasizing the stakes not just for the individuals involved, but for the integrity of American democracy. "This case is about more than personalities," one organizer declared. "It's about ensuring that our institutions function fairly, and that deception and manipulation have consequences, regardless of who commits them." Social media amplified the fervor, turning hashtags into rallying cries. Videos of courtroom moments, particularly Jasmine Crockett's calm and authoritative presence during testimony and cross-examination, were shared millions of times. Clips of witnesses recounting pressure to alter documents or conceal critical information ignited outrage and discussions about systemic accountability. Online forums buzzed with debates, legal analyses, and calls to action, while memes and commentary spread the story to audiences who might not otherwise follow courtroom proceedings. News outlets framed the public response as a barometer of national sentiment. Cable networks broadcast live footage of rallies, interviews with citizens, and expert panels analyzing both the legal and societal impact of the case. Opinion columns dissected how public pressure was shaping political and legal narratives, and how social media engagement was influencing perceptions of justice in real time. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was charged by this external energy. Witnesses were keenly aware that their testimony would not remain confined to the room. It would ripple outward, shaping opinion and narrative far beyond the trial. Jasmine Crockett, for her part, maintained her composure, balancing the weight of public attention with the precision required to navigate the complexities of legal strategy. By the close of the day, it was clear that the case had transcended the courtroom. Public awareness and activism had created a parallel arena, one where citizen engagement, media scrutiny, and social sentiment were exerting pressure alongside legal arguments. The trial was no longer just about evidence and testimony. It had become a national dialogue on justice, power, and accountability. The courtroom buzzed with an electric tension as the climactic hearing began. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the proceedings. Jasmine Crockett rose with measured confidence, fully aware that the outcome of this session could define not only the lawsuit, but also the broader conversation about accountability and power. Her legal team flanked her, documents neatly arranged, witnesses ready to testify, and every strategy meticulously rehearsed. The defense opened with a forceful statement, reiterating claims that the lawsuit was politically motivated and legally unfounded. "Ladies and gentlemen," their lead attorney said, "we stand before you today not to defend misconduct, but to protect the integrity of the judicial process against overreach and conjecture." The words were polished, precise, designed to sway perception and plant seeds of doubt. Crockett responded without hesitation, her voice steady, measured, yet charged with moral clarity. She outlined the evidence again, emphasizing the documented communications, corroborated testimonies, and financial irregularities that formed the backbone of her case. "This is not conjecture," she declared, eyes scanning the courtroom. "This is proof of deliberate actions taken to mislead, manipulate, and evade accountability. Justice demands that we confront these facts directly." Witnesses took the stand once more, each one reinforcing the narrative of systemic deception. The former executive recounted directives with unwavering clarity. The legal team whistleblower detailed moments of explicit obstruction. Every revelation layered tension upon tension, building toward an inevitable crescendo. Even the judge, silent and composed, seemed visibly engaged, leaning forward at pivotal moments. The defense attempted last-minute challenges, calling into question minor inconsistencies and attempting to sow doubt, but Crockett's team anticipated each maneuver. Emails were presented in sequence, showing clear patterns. Expert testimony clarified complex financial maneuvers. Each piece of evidence reinforced the credibility of the witnesses. Outside, the media and social platforms were alive with speculation. Clips of the hearing spread rapidly, fueling discussions and debates nationwide. Viewers dissected every argument, every gesture, and every pause, turning the courtroom drama into a cultural event with profound political implications. By the end of the hearing, the momentum had clearly shifted. The foundation for judgment had been laid with clarity and precision, leaving the courtroom charged with anticipation. Every argument had been made, every testimony scrutinized, And now all eyes turned to the judge, awaiting a ruling that could resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The climactic confrontation had reached its peak, and the nation held its breath. The courtroom fell into a tense hush as the judge prepared to deliver the ruling. Months of testimony, cross-examinations, and legal wrangling had built to this singular moment. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her expression calm, yet resolute, aware that the outcome would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Every document, every witness account, and every meticulously prepared argument had led to this point. The judge's voice broke the silence, measured and deliberate. After careful consideration of the evidence, testimonies, and legal arguments presented, the court finds that the claims outlined in this lawsuit are supported by substantial and credible evidence. The motions to dismiss are denied, and the case will proceed to trial. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The ruling validated the painstaking work of Crockett and her team, affirming that the allegations were not only serious, but grounded in documented actions and verified communications. Crockett allowed herself a brief exhale, a subtle acknowledgement of the victory. Her legal team exchanged restrained smiles, understanding the significance of this moment. It was not the end, but a crucial turning point. Outside, reporters captured the historic announcement, cameras flashing as crowds of supporters erupted into cheers. Social media instantly ignited, clips of the ruling going viral within minutes. The hashtag Justice with Crockett trended as citizens expressed a mix of relief, pride, and vindication. The defense, though visibly disappointed, maintained professional composure. Analysts quickly dissected the ruling, noting that it not only allowed the case to proceed, but also set a powerful precedent. Even the most influential figures could be held accountable when evidence demonstrated clear patterns of misconduct. The following days, the ruling reverberated across Washington. Lawmakers, pundits, and legal scholars debated the implications, acknowledging that the decision reinforced the principle that no individual, regardless of status, is immune from legal scrutiny. For Crockett, it was a vindication of meticulous preparation, moral courage, and unyielding dedication to justice. As the courthouse emptied and the media coverage continued to dominate headlines, one truth was unmistakable: the opening gambit had succeeded. Jasmine Crockett had exposed a carefully orchestrated pattern of misconduct, shifted the balance of public discourse, and reminded the nation that accountability, when pursued with diligence and courage, could prevail. The stage was now set for the trial to unfold fully. But the impact of this victory, legal, political, and cultural, would resonate far into the future. The courtroom had entered its final phase, a tense space where strategy, evidence, and public perception converged. Jasmine Crockett's team prepared for the first day of the trial proper, aware that the preceding rulings had given them momentum but not certainty. Every detail mattered: the order of witness testimony, the timing of evidence presentation, and the narrative arc that would guide the jury through months of complex financial and legal information. The prosecution opened with a compelling statement, emphasizing the deliberate nature of the alleged misconduct. "This is not a case of oversight or error," Crockett declared, her voice carrying a weight that filled the room. "This is a pattern of intentional deception designed to mislead, manipulate, and evade accountability." Her words resonated, echoing through the gallery and across broadcast feeds, setting the tone for the trial's first day. Witnesses recounted experiences that painted a vivid picture of internal pressures and directives aimed at circumventing transparency. Financial analysts and former executives provided detailed explanations, connecting emails, memos, and transaction records to show a consistent strategy of concealment. The testimony was precise yet emotionally charged, humanizing the technical evidence and underscoring the gravity of the accusations. The defense continued its attempts to discredit witnesses, probing motives and highlighting minor inconsistencies. Yet Crockett's team anticipated these challenges, methodically presenting corroborating evidence and demonstrating the consistency of the testimonies. The courtroom became a stage where every gesture, every pause, and every exchange carried significance. Outside, the trial had become a cultural and political event. News outlets broadcast live coverage, social media amplified key moments, and citizens engaged in fervent debate. The narrative extended beyond legal arguments, becoming a symbol of accountability and the broader fight for transparency in governance. As the first day concluded, the jury and spectators alike were left with an unmistakable impression. The case was meticulously constructed, the evidence compelling, and the stakes higher than ever. Jasmine Crockett had successfully framed the trial, not only as a legal challenge, but as a moral reckoning, setting the stage for the dramatic confrontations that would define the remainder of the proceedings. The final chapter opened with a palpable intensity, the courtroom charged with anticipation. Months of investigation, legal strategy, and dramatic testimony had built to this defining moment. Jasmine Crockett rose, her posture steady and commanding, fully aware that the culmination of her efforts would resonate far beyond this single case. Every witness called, every document presented, and every line of argument had led to the most critical phase, delivering the final evidence and solidifying a case that could change the course of political and legal accountability. The prosecution began by meticulously recapping the core narrative, a coordinated pattern of misconduct designed to manipulate legal outcomes and evade accountability. Crockett's voice rang with moral clarity as she highlighted the documents, emails, and witness accounts that demonstrated deliberate deception. "The evidence speaks for itself," she declared, scanning the room with a steady gaze. "This is a record of intentional actions, repeated directives, and systemic concealment. Justice cannot turn a blind eye to such conduct." Witnesses returned to the stand, each delivering testimony that connected the threads of the case into a cohesive whole. Former executives recounted precise instructions to misrepresent financial information. Legal team members described internal pressure to withhold critical documents. Analysts detailed discrepancies that, when viewed together, revealed a pattern impossible to dismiss. The jury absorbed the accounts, their expressions reflecting the weight of truth in each statement. The defense attempted one final push, seeking to fracture credibility and inject doubt. Attorneys emphasized minor inconsistencies and questioned witness motivations, framing the case as politically charged rather than factual. Yet Crockett's team countered with precision, presenting corroborating evidence and drawing connections that reinforced the integrity of each testimony. Emails were shown in sequence, meeting minutes were highlighted, and financial records were traced, leaving little room for doubt. Outside, media coverage captured every moment. News outlets provided live updates, social media exploded with clips of Crockett's compelling statements, and analysts debated the legal and cultural implications. The public was captivated, the trial transcending the courtroom to become a symbol of accountability and civic vigilance. Supporters celebrated her courage, while opponents analyzed every argument, highlighting the significance of the legal precedent being established. As the final day concluded, the courtroom held a solemn energy. The evidence was clear, the testimonies compelling, and the narrative of deliberate misconduct meticulously documented. Jasmine Crockett had not only presented a legal case, she had orchestrated a moral reckoning. The culmination of her efforts underscored a fundamental truth, that accountability, diligence, and courage could confront even the most powerful, and that justice, when pursued relentlessly, could prevail. The stage was set for the judgment, to echo through political and legal discourse, leaving an indelible mark on the landscape of American governance. The courtroom was electric, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the proceedings. Jasmine Crockett had reached a pivotal stage, the summation of months of meticulous investigation, painstaking testimony, and strategic legal maneuvering. This was the moment to consolidate her case, presenting the narrative in its most compelling form, leaving no doubt about the deliberate misconduct she had meticulously documented. Crockett began with calm authority, her voice steady yet charged with moral weight. Today is not about politics. It is about truth. It is about accountability. The evidence we have presented over weeks of testimony demonstrates a clear and deliberate pattern of actions designed to mislead, manipulate, and evade responsibility. She paused, allowing the words to resonate throughout the courtroom. Every listener, from jurors to reporters, understood that this was the culmination of a legal and ethical crusade. The prosecution methodically recapped the most damning evidence. Emails were displayed in sequence, showing explicit instructions to misrepresent financial records. Witnesses' statements were highlighted, each corroborating the next, forming an unbroken chain of accountability. Former executives and legal staff were referenced in precise detail, their testimony underscoring the systemic nature of the actions under scrutiny. The narrative painted a vivid picture. These were not isolated errors, but coordinated efforts to conceal truth. The defense rose to challenge the framing, attempting to portray the case as partisan and overblown. They emphasized minor inconsistencies in memory and questioned motivations, hoping to erode the credibility of the witnesses. But Crockett's team anticipated these maneuvers, countering with clarity and precision. Each challenge was met with corroborating documents, detailed analyses, and the testimony of independent experts who contextualized the evidence. The courtroom became a stage where logic, documentation, and ethical urgency converged. Outside the courtroom, media coverage was relentless. News anchors replayed key moments. Social media amplified clips of Crockett's closing statements, and commentators debated the broader implications for political accountability. The public followed each development with intensity, interpreting the legal battle as a proxy for transparency and integrity in leadership. As Crockett concluded, she appealed not only to the letter of the law, but to the broader principle of justice. This case reminds us, she stated, that no individual, no matter their power or influence, is immune from accountability. Justice is not selective, it is universal. Her words echoed in the chamber, a moral crescendo that reinforced the weight of the trial. The judge and jury, silent and attentive, absorbed the summation. The legal arguments had been laid bare, the evidence meticulously presented, and the moral clarity undeniable. As the chapter closed, the courtroom was charged with anticipation. The trial had moved beyond procedure to something far more consequential, a national reckoning with truth, power, and responsibility. Jasmine Crockett had not only crafted a legal argument, she had forged a moral and civic statement that would resonate long after the gavel fell. The courtroom was tense, the air thick, with anticipation as Jasmine Crockett prepared to deliver her final arguments. Months of rigorous investigation, exhaustive witness testimony, and painstakingly documented evidence had culminated in this pivotal moment. The trial had become more than a legal proceeding. It had evolved into a moral reckoning, a stage on which the integrity of governance and accountability for the nation's highest powers were being contested. Every observer, jurors, media personnel, and the public following from afar felt the gravity of the moment. Crockett rose with measured poise, exuding the quiet confidence that had come to define her presence throughout the trial. "This case is not about politics," she began, her voice steady and resonant. "It is about truth. It is about the principle that no one, regardless of status or influence, is above the law." She let the statement linger, scanning the courtroom and letting the weight of her words settle in the room. It was a reminder that the trial was not merely a confrontation between individuals, but a reflection of the values underpinning the justice system itself. She methodically reviewed the evidence, beginning with the documented emails and internal communications that revealed deliberate efforts to misrepresent financial statements. Each instruction, each memo, each internal communication paints a picture of intentional deception, Crockett explained, gesturing toward the exhibits that lined the courtroom. This is not a series of mistakes or oversights. It is a coordinated strategy to obscure truth and evade accountability. The jurors listened intently, the narrative of methodical misconduct resonating with an undeniable clarity. Crockett then shifted to the testimonies of former executives and legal team members, each of whom had recounted the pressures, directives, and obstacles placed before them. She connected these narratives into a cohesive chain, highlighting the consistency and corroboration across multiple sources. Their accounts are not isolated, she emphasized. They form a continuous thread that demonstrates deliberate and repeated actions taken to mislead and manipulate. Her tone was calm, yet imbued with moral urgency, each word crafted to reinforce the credibility of the witnesses while underscoring the ethical stakes. The defense attempted one final challenge, questioning witness motives and emphasizing minor inconsistencies. They sought to frame the case as partisan, hoping to sow doubt and shift focus away from the substance of the evidence. But Crockett anticipated these arguments, countering with precision. She highlighted corroborating documentation, sequencing the emails and memos to illustrate pattern and intent, and referenced independent analyses to contextualize the financial maneuvers. The courtroom became a theater of logic and moral clarity, where evidence, testimony, and ethical reasoning converged. Outside, media coverage reached a fever pitch. Clips of Crockett's closing arguments went viral, sparking widespread discussion and debate. Social media amplified her statements, with citizens, pundits, and legal analysts weighing in on the implications for political accountability. The trial had transcended its legal bounds, becoming a national dialogue about transparency, responsibility, and the limits of power. Demonstrations outside the courthouse mirrored the intensity inside, with supporters rallying for justice and critics questioning motives, underscoring the case's cultural and political resonance. Crockett concluded her summation with a call to universal principles of justice. "This is a moment to reaffirm that our legal system is not selective," she declared, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. "Accountability is not optional, and integrity is not negotiable. The evidence before you is clear, consistent, and compelling. Justice demands recognition of this truth." Her words were measured, precise, yet charged with a moral force that resonated far beyond the room itself. The judge observed silently, absorbing the weight of the arguments and the clarity of the evidence. The jury, attentive and contemplative, faced the monumental task of weighing months of testimony, documents, and legal reasoning against the broader context of power and accountability. The courtroom's tension was almost tangible. The collective awareness of the historical significance of this trial, pressing down on every participant as the chapter drew to a close. It was evident that Jasmine Crockett had not merely conducted a legal battle, she had orchestrated a national reckoning. The evidence, the testimonies, and her unwavering moral clarity had created a narrative that demanded attention, reflection, and ultimately, accountability. The trial had transcended the immediate legal dispute, becoming a defining moment in American jurisprudence and public consciousness. In the quiet that followed her final arguments, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath, awaiting the judgment that would resonate far beyond the walls of justice. This chapter closed, not with resolution, but with the weight of inevitability. The groundwork for accountability had been laid. The moral and legal arguments had been crystallized, and the nation watching, debating, and reflecting was acutely aware that the outcome would mark a watershed moment. Jasmine Crockett had transformed a courtroom into a crucible of justice, proving that meticulous preparation, moral courage, and relentless pursuit of truth could challenge even the most formidable powers and leave an indelible mark on history. The final phase of the trial had arrived, and the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Months of testimony, cross-examination, and documentary evidence had built toward this decisive moment. Jasmine Crockett's legal strategy had been methodical. From the start, meticulously documenting misconduct, building an unassailable chain of corroboration, and presenting her case with a clarity that left little room for doubt. Now, as she prepared to deliver her closing arguments, the atmosphere was charged with historical significance. Every journalist, every juror, every onlooker understood that the outcome of this trial would resonate far beyond the courthouse walls. Crockett began with calm authority, her voice carrying the weight of experience and moral certainty. "This case is not about partisanship," she said, letting the words settle into the hushed room. "It is about truth. It is about accountability. It is about ensuring that our institutions function with integrity, and that no individual, no matter how powerful, is beyond the reach of the law." Her words were precise yet charged with conviction, setting the tone for the final summation. She revisited the evidence, weaving together the complex web of communications, memos, and internal directives that demonstrated deliberate attempts to mislead regulators, manipulate financial statements, and evade legal responsibility. "The evidence speaks for itself," Crockett asserted. "Every email, every memo, every recorded directive reveals a pattern of intentional deception. These are not isolated incidents. They are coordinated efforts to obstruct accountability." The jury leaned forward, following the narrative with rapt attention as Crockett laid out the timeline of misconduct, each piece of evidence meticulously tied to corroborating testimony. Witnesses' accounts were highlighted once more. Former executives described explicit instructions to misrepresent financial data. Members of the legal team recounted moments when critical documents were withheld or altered. Independent analysts corroborated the discrepancies in accounting practices. Crockett emphasized the consistency across these accounts, framing the testimony as an unbroken chain of responsibility. "The pattern is clear," she said. "It is deliberate, systemic, and undeniable." The defense mounted a final attempt to fracture the narrative, questioning minor inconsistencies and suggesting that witnesses might have personal motives. Yet Crockett countered with precision, presenting corroborating documentation and sequencing the evidence to demonstrate intentionality and consistency. She deftly highlighted how independent analyses validated the witness testimonies, leaving the courtroom with a clear and coherent understanding of the misconduct under scrutiny. Outside, the trial had reached a cultural crescendo. News outlets provided live coverage, while social media amplified the courtroom moments in real time. Clips of Crockett's statements went viral, sparking widespread discussion and debate about accountability, governance, and the ethical responsibilities of public figures. Rallies and demonstrations reflected the heightened engagement of citizens, energized by the idea that legal and moral responsibility could be enforced at the highest levels of power. Crockett concluded by appealing not only to legal principles, but to civic conscience. "This case is a reminder that justice is not selective," she said, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. "Integrity is not negotiable. The law is universal, and accountability is inevitable. We are not here to punish partisanship. We are here to affirm that deliberate deception has consequences, and that truth matters." Her words carried moral force, resonating beyond the legal framework and into the national dialogue. The jury, silent and contemplative, absorbed the summation. They had been presented with months of detailed evidence, expert analysis, and eyewitness testimony. The courtroom itself seemed to hum with tension, the weight of history pressing on every participant. The media and public followed with bated breath, aware that the judgment would mark a significant moment in political and legal precedent. As the chapter closed, the courtroom held its collective breath. Jasmine Crockett had transformed a trial into a moral and civic statement, demonstrating that preparation, courage, and relentless pursuit of truth could confront even the most formidable figures. The trial had transcended its immediate legal bounds, leaving an indelible mark on the national consciousness. Accountability, justice, and integrity had been placed squarely at the forefront, and the nation waited, captivated, for the final reckoning that would define not just a lawsuit, but the very principle that no one is above the law. This chapter ended with a sense of both triumph and anticipation. Crockett's meticulous work had set the stage for judgment. Her evidence had woven an undeniable narrative, and the moral stakes had been clearly articulated. The courtroom, the jury, and the public were united in understanding that this moment represented more than legal strategy. It was a testament to the enduring power of truth, justice, and civic courage. The final day of proceedings had arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Months of meticulous preparation, relentless investigation, and strategic legal maneuvering had led to this moment. Jasmine Crockett, standing poised before the jury, understood the stakes. This was more than a legal confrontation. It was a decisive statement about accountability, integrity, and the principle that no individual, regardless of power or status, is beyond the reach of the law. Every journalist, observer, and member of the public following the live coverage sensed that history was in the making. Crockett began with a measured, commanding voice, her tone calm yet infused with moral urgency. This trial is not about politics or personal vendettas. It is about truth and the responsibility each of us bears to uphold the integrity of our institutions, she said. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, pausing briefly on the jury, who listened with focused attention. Every piece of evidence presented here demonstrates a pattern of intentional actions designed to mislead, manipulate, and evade accountability. Justice demands that we confront these facts, not ignore them. She methodically revisited the core evidence, internal communications revealing directives to misrepresent financial statements, memos showing deliberate attempts to conceal critical documents from auditors, and testimonies of former executives and legal staff who had courageously exposed unethical practices. Each account reinforced the others, creating a cohesive narrative that illustrated the calculated nature of the misconduct. Crockett emphasized the consistency and credibility of the witnesses, framing their accounts as undeniable proof of deliberate, repeated actions. The defense, sensing the weight of the case against them, mounted one final attempt to challenge the credibility of witnesses and the integrity of the evidence. Attorneys emphasized minor discrepancies in recollection, questioned motivations, and sought to frame the trial as partisan in nature. But Crockett's team had anticipated these maneuvers. They countered with precision, presenting corroborating documentation, highlighting the sequence and context of communications, and referencing independent analyses that validated the testimonies. Each challenge was systematically dismantled, reinforcing the strength and coherence of the prosecution's narrative. Outside the courtroom, the trial had become a national event. News outlets broadcast live coverage, dissecting each argument and analyzing the implications for political accountability. Social media erupted with clips of Crockett's statements and witness testimonies, sparking debates about integrity, transparency, and the role of the law in regulating powerful figures. Citizens organized rallies, petitions, and community discussions, reflecting a society deeply engaged in the trial's outcome and its broader consequences. As the final arguments drew to a close, Crockett appealed to both logic and conscience. The evidence before you is not conjecture. It is deliberate, corroborated, and consistent, she stated. This case is a reminder that accountability is not optional, and that integrity is not negotiable. The rule of law applies to everyone, regardless of wealth, influence, or status. Justice demands recognition of these truths. Her words reverberated through the courtroom, a moral crescendo that underscored the significance of the trial, not only as a legal proceeding, but as a reflection of national values. The judge and jury absorbed the closing arguments in solemn attention. The evidence, meticulously documented and presented, left little room for doubt. The courtroom was charged with anticipation. The moment of judgment was imminent. Outside, the media and public followed with bated breath, aware that the outcome would have profound legal, political, and cultural implications. As the chapter concluded, it was clear that Jasmine Crockett had transformed the trial into a defining moment of accountability. Her meticulous preparation, unwavering moral clarity, and strategic presentation had established a narrative that was impossible to ignore. The courtroom had become a crucible of justice, where truth, evidence, and ethical responsibility converged. The nation waited, captivated, for the final ruling that would determine not only the outcome of the lawsuit, but also reinforce the enduring principle that no one is above the law.